this presentation is a bit less content-wise, a bit less scientific, more tool-oriented. It's also for an introduction for this workshop setting tomorrow. I will just quickly go through the current ECA plans to put everything clear. Present a bit Chesar for those who are not aware about it, just because this is something which we have to consider. I'm not saying that it will play any role in the future in the EUSES development, but still we have Chesar, this tool which interacts with users, so we have to take it into account. And then I said trying to raise a few questions on which we need to reflect when we develop the tool to make some choices. These are not questions on really how to approach the development, like what was raised this morning, but it's more for the tool development itself. So at the moment, the thinking what was done, and maybe we will reconsider this, but was more in the continuity a bit of what we have now. And at the moment, so EUSES has been developed between, okay, Dick put 92 in his slides, I put 94, don't know exactly what's true, what's wrong. And the last version was from 2012. I think there has been no release since then. As you know, I mean, we are talking about different versions of EUSES. So there are versions, there is this, when we talk about the tool, we talk about the EUSES tool developed in C++ and Delphi interface, but there are also different versions of the same calculation. Excel version, and also this Excel version has been implemented in a set of TRA, in easy TRA. And we, for Chesar, had to redevelop the calculation in a more modern IT technology, so we have redeveloped the same calculation in Java in Chesar. As we all know, the tool is not maintained anymore, and IT-wise, it's partly outdated, at least the current tool, especially from what I understood, the user interface, but there's a lot of things happening in the user interface of the users. And as Heike just said, because there was an urgent need to do something for biocides, I mean, ECA has decided to take over, is now working a bit doing this quick fix to be delivered by the end of the year. But it's really a quick fix, it's not a sustainable solution. So ECA's objective is really to maintain a tool supporting harmonized and transparent environmental assessment. So really our objective is for having efficient decision-making in regulatory context, which is a limited objective. And it doesn't mean that EUSES development will only cover this objective. We need to define, but that's clearly at least our key interest. And as I already said before, we need to assess what should be done and how much it will cost. And the idea is to do that. So today, tomorrow, we would like to collect information via this workshop on many different aspects. And then we plan to have a pre-study. This pre-study is twofold: to understand really content-wise what will need to be changed and make some kind of what we call analysis and design for a new application, taking into account those need for changes. And for this, we need to understand the impact of the changes on the IT code. So can we start from what we have now and adapt it to how far, etc., and how? And also, how should the tool be developed and be made available, and how should it be maintained? And there are a number of questions which I will raise later, and for example, also connection with other applications as they needed, etc. And the exact content of this pre-study we will define after this workshop, because we wanted first to collect the views, ideas, etc., and then to figure out what do we need to clarify first before we really go to the step of developing EUSES. For this pre-study, we intend to involve this organizing committee for this workshop that we had, whether it needs to be extended or not. I mean, good if there is one or, I mean, additional volunteers, let's see, but it should remain a relatively small group to get this thing started. Quickly on the timing, so the idea is that from now to spring, we will prepare for the pre-study till the end of the year. This pre-study will start in the Q4 this year and run until spring next year. Then we will take a decision how to move on, get organized for procurement, for implementation. And we have, for the moment, in mind that probably it takes 2 years for first implementation. So to have something ready by end of 2021. And then going for further, what we call evolutive maintenance. Let's see what this is. So this is at the moment the idea. There are question marks there because indeed all this will be largely defined by the pre-study. So I will present a bit on Chesar from the environmental assessment in Chesar for those who are not aware of it. The reason for doing so is, as I said, we have recorded a large part of EUSES in Chesar, so we need to take this into account. Can I just ask who doesn't know about Chesar, environmental assessment Chesar in the audience, to know whether to skip or to go through number 5? Okay, very few people. Okay, I will go quickly through it. So in principle, Chesar has been developed for the moment just to support registrants and their reach, to carry out their assessment and to report their assessment for their registration, and also to generate the exposure map for communication via next to the SDS. So it was really targeted to this aim. The organization, we call it box by boxes, so there is a bit of a workflow. There are 5 boxes for carrying out the assessment, so one for dealing with the different substances, second one for describing the users, third one for carrying out the exposure assessment, fourth one for the generation of the report, the CSR, and the fifth for the exposure map for SDS, and 2 more support boxes for the library and user management. So very quickly, when you're in box 1 for the substance management, if you select there is a number of tabs on the left, and the first one on substance management enables to import or select substances. So if here I select my ECA substance, it's also reported on the top, and it will be there. And then I will see the different, for example, if I click on FISCHEM properties, I will see the different values for FISCHEM properties for my substance under assessment. Another aspect for related to an environmental assessment, we have this what we call the fate in the standard biological STP. This is calculated by default via EUSES on the basis of the substance properties. So you can see the different release fraction going to the different release routes after the STP. And it's possible in Chesar to overwrite those fractions, but then you need to provide a justification. This is the small bubble at the below. If you have to fill it some justification when you change something. So it's better supporting explanation around your changes. If you go, then you have also the effect assessment. So this is only on, classical way, importing the PNEX, having the PBT outcome assessment, and this will help in triggering what needs to be assessed. Then there is this box 2, which is about the use description. Here, just an illustration. So you have to describe your different uses. Here, manufacturing, formulation, and then different uses below. And if I select this formulation, there is one contributing activity, as we call it, for the environment, which needs to be assessed, but it also covers the human health aspect below. And when you are in box 3 for the assessment, so you select your contributing activity for the environment, and then you have a number of different parts. So in the release and exposure part, you have the conditions of use and the releases, which are handing together, and then the exposure estimates, which are provided by EUSES. Then for the conditions of use, you can select different ways. Either it's manually provided or it's by selecting a skirt, like Romana presented. And by default, you have a few key conditions of use, which are always there. So the amount available at the site for a day, available for release, and also for a year. And also some setting of the biological STP, which is by default what we call standard, meaning that you can't change the setting for the different routes. You can't change the discharge rate. You can't change the application, whether you have application of sludge. This is all set by default, and it's only if you set the biological STP to site-specific that you can modify the thing. So some kind of steering implemented in the tool to have more standardized, harmonized approach. The release are provided from there. So you have the before STP, depending on the release estimation method. And if you want to modify, then you have again those kind of bubbles on the right that you can provide explanation what you do. Then you have also, just for information, the release after the biological STP, what happens. And finally, you get for the different protection targets release compartment the exposure estimates. So in the column last but one, and then the risk and the risk characterization ratio for the different protection targets. So this is, in short, what has been implemented in EUSES, in Chesar. Well, the last is the generation of the CSR. So when you click the button Generate CSR, you have a formatted report which puts all the information together, so a bit more elaborated than the reporting from EUSES, where all the information is there, including the explanation that were developed. So that's all the basics. I will also present something what we would call an advanced functionality. We call it the assessment of complex cases, but I mean complex should be put in brackets. What we mean by that is the case where several sets of information on the substance properties are needed to carry out the exposure and risk assessment. So, for example, if you have for one substance different hazard profile going to different uses which need to be assessed, because under REACH it's possible to have under one registration dossier several hazard profiles, depending, for example, on the impurities contained into different compositions. It's also to cover substances which are transforming into another substance, for example, transforming during use or in the STP, and where you have to assess the parent and the metabolite, or substances which are composed of many constituents, which may be need to be assessed in parallel. So this is really what we have implemented, is to carry out different parallel assessment. This is also presented tomorrow. I will not go into the detail, but just to say, I mean, the way it has been implemented is with using what we call the assessment entity in Euclid, and you have a number of further explanations. But just to mention that this is already, I mean, there's something covered in Chesar, and this is, for example, illustrating the starting point where you have your different, so in column you have your different, in this case, group of constituents, and you have the different properties as a starting point for each of them, and the outcome of the assessment is that you see for each compartment you will have different exposure estimates and different risk characterization ratio for the different constituents. Could be for parent and transformation product. So not going into detail, but just to illustrate that this already Exists. I will skip this one. So if you are interested, you can always find more information on Chesar in the manual on our website, etc. So what some of the critical choices, at least for our IT colleagues, what to do. Would like to present some background information to help for the discussion tomorrow. This is a very high-level structure of the tool as it is. So there is a user interface, and there is this exposure assessment module with some QSAR for the state parameter, a release module, and then exposure module, meaning the state and distribution. At the moment, there is even a PNEC calculation module and a risk characterization module in the current EUSES. A different representation. Seems that it's not really readable. Just to make it clear, in the current EUSES there is Consexpo and there is EASE. This is not what we are talking about. This will be out of scope for the update. We are only talking about the environmental part. And just a few questions regarding usage of the questions that our colleagues have on the usage of the EUSES. For example, is there a need for a known interface, or can it be integrated with changes, of course, into Chesar? The PNEC calculation engine, I mean, there is already a PNEC calculator which is embedded in Euclid. Can we use this one to prevent having two ways of doing so? The system parameters of the substance, should we enable a direct input from Euclid? As I mentioned before, there is a part which is already implemented in Chesar on the release, on the exposure, on the risk characterization. So what shall we do with this? And then also questions, do we need to import, export data, save data, etc., etc. So our starting point is that, as said, we have re-implemented inside Chesar all the calculation engine of EUSES, and we would like to know whether and how to reuse that. And some of the questions that, for example, the IT colleagues asked, to which extent do we need to modify or extend the calculation engine? So this content modification, this is mainly what we will discuss today, what we'll present in the afternoon and discuss tomorrow. So what shall we change? Should we modify the usability? So the user interface, the reporting functionality, etc. So this is, I think, what Diederik presented before, that there is a need for improving the usability of the tool. Do we need to maintain a standalone version? Do we need to facilitate the reuse of the calculation into other tools? I mean, all these things are on the table, and we need to get a bit of input from you as key users of the tool, or fully representing key users of the tool, to know what to do. So I will go through a number of questions. It's to familiarize you with the questions that will be discussed tomorrow. For example, in order to anticipate, to design the application, we need to anticipate a bit what will be the release sequence, so what will be the expected frequency of release for the tool later on. What is clear is that the changes to the current calculation engine we need to do now, I mean in the first release, so between version 2 and version 3 of EUSES, because if we change the calculation engine, it has an impact on what has been done before, and in the regulatory context, it's quite important to be able to migrate information, to maintain information, and to understand what changed when. So in principle, we should not change existing calculation too often. Nevertheless, there can be extension to calculation. For example, if we want to have new release scenario, new model, or extension of applicability going to other substances. and I understand that this is to be thought through with care, given what was presented this morning, that we need to simplify. But this would be possible to have several versions of the tool, so we would call it EUSES version 3.1, 3.2, 3.3. And then there could be some very small technical changes, either new functionalities, enabling a reporting, changing a reporting, or fixing bugs. In this case, it would be the version 3x1 to 3. And depending on how we want to deal with this update or frequency of release, this has some impact on how we should give up the application. So this will be questions for you tomorrow. If we think about the candidates, about the standalone version of EUSES, so a tool on its own, there are two candidates for tool, either a local version, so you install on your own computer, or an online version, so you connect to internet and you have access to it. So the main key differences between those two options would be that, okay, for the local version, you don't need internet. For the online version, you need it. In terms of installation, the local version, you have to install yourself, while the online version is just directly accessible. In terms of updates, a local version, there is a need for reinstall the application, migrate your data possibly, while for the online version, this is carried out by the host, so probably ECA if we would go for this, meaning that it's not in a way visible. The user is informed about the change, but he has nothing to do. The data for the local version would be stored locally, so each company installing a version has access to its own data, but it's only accessible from their own computer. While if for an online version, the data are stored on the host computer, so it can be accessed from any computer. Nevertheless, with of course username, password, the protected. The data are only accessible to the owner, but via any computer. And in terms of maintenance of the tool, an online version is then you have to contact the help desk, and for some bugs, then you have to wait for the next release. While for the online version, it's more integrated and direct, because there can be more direct, dedicated support and fast correction. So something to think about. In terms of user access to the tool, the question is, do we need a standalone version of EUSES, meaning with its own user interface, or would it be acceptable if the access to EUSES would be done via Chesar, having in mind that of course it would need to be extended to be fit for other needs, so fit for purpose, and that's those needs that we need to understand a bit better. Try to put a few of the difference between the current standalone version of EUSES and the current Chesar, so not what could be done, but what is today. In the workflow at the moment in EUSES, so it's, as you know, screen by screen, while in Chesar the workflow is a bit more high level. All the parameters can be edited, I think, or nearly all can be edited in a EUSES standalone version, and you have this small D, O, or S, depending on what's the status of the parameter. While in Chesar we have restricted the number of parameters to be editable. We only made, for the moment, editable the parameters which we thought are really needed for our registrants to modify, and usually there is a possibility to explain and to report why we changed, which you can't do in the current EUSES, so that's one of the differences. So in terms of also tiered approach, which is largely connected, so in the current EUSES, all the parameters have the same status. I mean, they can be changed or not changed, but you can't really see where you stand. While in Chesar, we have somehow a bit more of a tiered approach, both for the release, so where you can go for different levels, so from the ERG to the SPERC, and then to some measured data with different level of explanation that you would provide. Or, for example, for the biological STP characterization, where you can change it, but only in certain cases, and then depending on what you click that you want to change, then you can change some parameters and explain. In terms of reporting, the report from the current users is very basic, while in Chesar it's much more elaborated. You generate automatically the final, in a way, the final report for a registrant to submit its registration. And of course, this could be easily adapted. For example, I think you call it on the biosite car, no, the different type of report. So this is at the moment the different, the key difference, main differences. The other difference is that in the way the information are flowing between different applications, at the moment it's possible to import information from Euclid to Chesar on the substance properties. Then Chesar sends this in a way to the calculation engine of EUSES together with the release information. Then the exposure estimates are retrieved automatically in Chesar. So, I mean, it's transparent, the relationship uses Chesar within Chesar, and then Chesar sends back some information in Euclid on use description and exposure information. And we have also the PNEC calculator, which is now in Euclid, which then enables to retrieve the PNECs from the initial study data. Another question that we need to figure out is what the needs of other applications to access the EUSES calculation engine. So beyond Chesar, we know that there are different other tools, and we need to understand what type of needs for reusing this calculation in other tools is. As we already expressed from the ECA perspective, we would like as much as possible to support, in a way, one tool at least for supporting the assessment in the REACH and biosites, in order to have more harmonized and more systematic way of doing, so that the regulatory process is more efficient. And that's why we are open to first extend a bit the coverage. We would like also to bring back a bit the approaches between biosites and REACH a bit more back together, possibly. Nevertheless, we know that there are other needs, and we are not sure whether all those needs could be covered by the future version of EUSES, which is the reason why we need to understand, is there a need to other tools to reuse the calculation engine. And tomorrow, Sarah Martin from the UK will present a need from the UK, but there is other needs. I mean, and for sure we need to discuss with SFOP, with EasyTRA, etc. In terms of, this gets really much more IT oriented. I'm trying to present it so there are possibly 3 different ways of doing this from an IT perspective. So a reusable library, so meaning that the code is made accessible to whoever tool owner will get the code from us and can put it in its application. There's also the possibility to have what we call local web service, meaning that you install EUSES on your application and then on your computer, and then you have your other application, and there is a way that the 2 applications talk to each other. And then there is the possibility, this online service that we have EUSES in ECA, and then any kind of other application call EUSES from our server. 2 differences. There are probably much more, but that's what we have put for the moment in terms of internet access. Again, if it's a reusable library or if it's meaning embedded into the tool, the other tool itself, or if it's on local web service, there is no need for internet. But as soon as they're online web service, then there is need for internet. I mean, now there is internet more and more everywhere, so whether this is a critical issue or not, we don't know. And then when you have updates of uses, especially minor changes, if it's included into the other application, it needs to be re-included, so repackaged. If it's on an online local web service, then it also needs to be reinstalled. If it's an online web service, then there is no change, I mean, in principle. But this is, of course, only for minor change, because if you change some data structure, you include new data, or then the other application have also to be readapted to the modification. So this is one of the other aspects. And as I said, tomorrow we would have this World Cafe discussion. I have two colleagues coming from ECHA, more from the IT perspective, who will run those discussions, where we would really like to collect your experience. So of course this is an opportunity also to have more explanation from our side, but also really to understand your expectations and to be able to present and think about different alternatives. So it's really an opportunity for us for collecting information to start thinking on more IT development aspects.
Okay,